On the morning of Monday, November 3rd, 2008, police responded to a 911 call at the Valley View Apartments in Redmond, Washington.
Emergency police paramedical.
Hello?
Can I help?
Hello? Yeah, come. This girl is in danger. Okay, please come.
There's what?
No, this girl fell down. Okay, and somebody broke her apartment and she's totally unconscious.
The front door to apartment 8946 had been kicked in, and 24-year-old Arpana Jinaga was found deceased on her bedroom floor. It was apparent she had been dead for a couple of days. The last time anyone had seen or heard from her was the early morning hours of November 1st, after she helped host a Halloween party at her apartment complex. According to the autopsy report, Arpana had been killed within hours of the party's end. Police started their investigation going through the party attendees, and soon they zeroed in on two suspects. But only one would be charged, and none would be convicted. The case remains open, and almost 2 decades later, there's still no answers. Who murdered Arpana Jinaga? Hi guys, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Jamie, and today I'm going to be doing a deep dive coverage on the Arpana Jinaga case. So when I initially started looking into this case, the first thing that stuck out to me is just how similar this case is to the Meredith Kercher case. Now, unlike the Meredith Kercher case, though, there is not a lot of information publicly available on Arpana's case. The most in-depth coverage I could find was season 1 of the Suspect podcast. They have a total of, I want to say, 10 episodes on this case. The only way you can listen to it is either if you are a Wondery subscriber or you at least sign up for their 7-day free trial. And I really enjoyed the Suspect podcast up until around episode 3 or 4. I want to say it was episode 4 when I started just going, that's a really weird way to frame the facts. And I just started feeling like they weren't telling me the full story. So I decided to do the research myself. I submitted in a Freedom of Information Act request, and I got the entire police file on this case. I've learned so many new things that haven't previously been reported on or aren't really well known. I'm super excited to share all of that information with y'all today. We have a lot of information to go through. This is going to be probably my longest video yet. I promised myself I would cover this entire case in one video, and by golly, I'm gonna do it even if it is 2.5 hours long. I'm thinking this video is gonna be 2.5 hours long. So let's not waste any time and dive right in. Arpana Jinaga was born on March 11th, 1984, and grew up in Hyderabad, India. Her dad was a computer engineering professor at a nearby university, and her mom was a housewife. She had a younger sister, Pavitra, whom she was very close with. And despite eventually moving halfway across the world, Arpana was very close with her family and spoke with them daily. She was a vegetarian and a phenomenal cook, often making dinner for her friends and neighbors. She was a talented singer and writer. After her death, the Arpana Jinaga Memorial Trust would publish Eternal Dream, a compilation of her poems and writings. And she was as smart as she was creative. She excelled at academics and decided to follow in her father's footsteps, quickly making a name for herself in the tech industry. At 20, she won the IEEE Hardware Design Contest for designing a low-cost general-purpose AVR-based single-board computer. At 21, she participated in a microchip design contest, where she designed a communications jammer. She didn't win, but she placed among the top 20 performers and was the only person from Asia within the top 20. She earned her bachelor's degree in India. In 2005, she decided to go abroad for her master's degree and attended Rutgers University in New Jersey. She graduated in December 2007 with a degree in electrical and computer engineering. Shortly after, she accepted a job offer as a software quality assurance manager with tech giant EMC in Bellevue, Washington. Bellevue is situated between Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish and is directly across from Seattle. The job was contracted to begin in March 2008, so Arpana packed up and made the move from New Jersey to Washington. She ended up renting a one bedroom, one bathroom apartment at the Valley View Apartments in Redmond, a wealthy suburb just 15 miles east of Seattle. Redmond is a tech hub and best known for being the home to the headquarters for both Microsoft and Nintendo. It's a quiet city with low crime rates. In 2008, there were only 2 murders in all of Redmond: Arpana's and the murder of Melissa Batten, a software development engineer who was killed by her estranged husband, Joseph Batten, who immediately committed suicide after. What happened to Melissa had been evident by the crime scene. Unfortunately, the investigation into Arpana's murder wouldn't be as clear cut. The Valley View apartments were located on the east side of Redwood Road. It sat on a hill that overlooked downtown Redmond and was across from the backside of the Bella Bodega shopping complex. The rent was cheap for the area, less than $800 for a one bed, one bath. Granted, the apartments were dated and could use some updates and fresh paint, but nothing major. The complex was small and consisted of a single 3-story building. The upper level apartments were accessible by an open outdoor staircase. Arpana rented an apartment on the 3rd floor and had neighbors on either side of her and directly below her. She didn't have many belongings when she moved in. She had only been in the US for about 3 years at this point. Her bed was a twin size blow up mattress on a folding stand, and she didn't really have any other furniture in her bedroom. Shortly after moving in, she purchased a small sofa from IKEA for her living room. And to get around, she bought a motorcycle, a black Suzuki GS 500. And she is a lot more courageous than I am. She had never ridden on a motorcycle before, and the first time she rode one, it fell over on her. But Arpana was determined and a quick learner. She took classes, got her license, and even joined a local motorcycle club, the Pacific Northwest Riders. She was a very social person and quickly got involved in the community. On top of joining a bike club, she volunteered at the local animal shelter and fire station. She worked out regularly at Gold's Gym and took classes at Wang's Taekwondo Club in Redmond. The residents at the Valley View took notice of the new girl speeding in and out of the parking lot on a motorcycle, and she quickly made friends with many of her neighbors. It wasn't long before Arpana became close with her first floor neighbors, Nicole Heaven and Ricardo Canorino. Whenever Ricardo and Nicole upgraded their TV, they gave their old one to Arpana, along with their old TV stand and VCR player, to help furnish her place. But Arpana wasn't very materialistic. She didn't watch the TV all that much. She would mostly stream videos and movies on her laptop. Nicole asked her if she ever planned on purchasing a real bed and more furniture. Arpana told her she didn't really need that stuff. Regardless, Arpana loved inviting her new friends and neighbors over. When she first moved in, she would often hang out with the apartment complex manager, Kristen Kosowitz, and her next door neighbor, Cameron Johnson. On August 17, 2008, Cameron and Arpana went to a Lady Gaga concert together. Cameron had won 2 tickets from radio station C89.5 and invited Arpana to go with him. Kristen and Arpana, both being neighbors and single girls, would go bar hopping together and had become good friends until around May or June when they stopped hanging out. Kristen would tell police that she just decided to start distancing herself from Arpana because she didn't feel the friendship was benefiting her, and she sometimes felt like a babysitter whenever they went out. Now, some gossip that went around the apartment was that Arpana and Kristen brought 2 guys home one night, and things didn't go according to plan. Kristen ended up kicking one of the guys out, and then her and Arpana stopped hanging out shortly after. Kristen was the apartment manager, but it wasn't an official job role. She would just get her rent heavily discounted in exchange for being the manager. She worked in commercial real estate and traveled for work and fun pretty often. At the time of the Halloween party and Arpana's murder, she was on a month-long trip to Hawaii visiting friends. Kristen left on October 3rd and didn't return until November 3rd, the same day Arpana's body was discovered. Around the same time that Arpana stopped hanging out with Kristen, she sort of stopped hanging out with Cameron too, and was starting to spend the majority of her free time getting more involved in the Pacific Northwest Riders. She went to most of their organized rides and meetups, and on several occasions, she had invited club members back to her place to hang out. After Arpana's death, the club organized a memorial ride in her honor on August 30th, 2009. They rode from Lake Sammamish State Park to Snoqualmie Falls, where they stopped to pay respects and for members to say final words. Many remembered Arpana by her online username, Cryptic Girl, and how she didn't know the most about bikes, but she was determined to learn. They then ended the ride by going past the Valley View apartments. Through the Pacific Northwest Riders, Arpana met fellow biker, 26-year-old Aaron Gertler, a sonography student at Pima Medical Institute. The two were in sort of a situationship. I believe Aaron described it to police as friends with benefits. Things between them were still very new, and Arpana hadn't been in the Seattle area very long. Aaron had been to her place about 5 times, and she had been to his place about 5 times too. The two were in a physical relationship, and his semen would later be found on a towel in her bedroom. Aaron did not see Arpana that Halloween weekend. He did not attend the party, and he had an alibi for the time of the murder. Arpana had invited him to the party, but he had already made other plans to go out bar hopping with some of his other friends in Seattle. He stayed out all night until returning back to his place during the early morning hours of November 3rd. When Arpana didn't call or message him all weekend, he didn't think much of it. They weren't official, and they didn't talk every single day. He also thought that maybe she might be a little mad at him for not going to her party. Aaron's alibi checked out, and he was ruled out as a suspect. In early October, Arpana and some of her other neighbors started planning an apartment-wide Halloween party, with a few tenants opening their homes to various partygoers. On October 4th, first floor tenant and apartment maintenance manager Roger Duffy sent out electronic invites and hung flyers around the complex. I find this kind of funny. They post the flyers for the Halloween party the day after Kristen, the apartment manager, leaves for a month-long vacation to Hawaii. Kristen would say she was aware of the Halloween party and she just told them to make sure it didn't get too rowdy and that they cleaned up after themselves. A total of 4 apartments agreed to host, with each being decorated with a different theme. Arpana's on the third floor was going to be a haunted forest. Roger's on the first floor was going to be a 60s lounge. Nicole and Ricardo's on the first would be a pirate theme. And first floor tenant Leslie Potts, whose apartment didn't really have a theme, but was going to be the non-scary designated kids area. As a parent, I find this kind of weird. Leslie didn't have any kids, yet her apartment was going to be the designated kids area for the party. She also had the most questionable house guest that weekend. Leslie was a new addition to the complex and had only moved in a couple months prior. She had a bit of a checkered past. She was 32 at the time, had dealt with addiction, and had a criminal record that included solicitation, possession, stealing a car, and driving with a suspended license. Leslie's mom had rented her the apartment as a way to help her start over. And it seemed to be helping. Leslie was clean and had a job working at Tully's Cafe in the nearby Bella Bodega shopping center. But that Halloween weekend, Leslie agreed to let a man she met online, 25-year-old Emmanuel de Melvin Fair, stay over at her apartment. The two had only known each other about 6 months and had met through MySpace. The relationship wasn't romantic, but Emmanuel had done Leslie an interesting favor. Prior to Leslie moving into the Valley View, Emmanuel helped her post a personal listing on Craigslist. When later asked about this, both agree Emmanuel was only trying to help a friend out and that he wasn't profiting off it in any way. If you listen to the Suspect podcast, they explain this away by saying, oh, Emmanuel had a computer and Leslie didn't. So he was just making the Craigslist post for her as a favor. Just helping a friend out. Problem with this explanation is that Leslie would later tell police that while Emmanuel was staying with her, he spent a lot of time on her computer going through social media. And then Emmanuel, when talking with police, would say that during the Halloween party, both Cameron and Arpana showed him their laptops, and he had mentioned that he was interested in getting a laptop because he didn't have a computer and he actually had a hard time getting internet access. So that's why he wanted a laptop.
Okay. And did you ever have occasion to go into her bedroom?
Um, I did one time when she was showing me, I think it was her laptop or some shit.
You remember what she was showing you on it?
No, she was no, because we was talking about the because I told her I was trying to buy a laptop, you know, and I remember her. She was talking about what she works, what she does, or something, you know. And but I wasn't like in a room for long or anything.
How long would you say?
I'd say like what 10 minutes or so. When she said something about I think it was something about what she does or something. I don't remember what it is. Like what she where she works and shit, you know. So and then that's when I was talking to her, like, cause I was trying to get it, cause it's hard for me to like get internet access or you know what I'm saying to a computer. So I was talking to her about computers and you know, and then I mentioned laptops, you know, and then she said, "Well, I have one." And
There was also some unusual activity on Arpana's computer that may indicate that her killer was also interested in her computer. More on that later. When police later questioned the other Valley View residents and partygoers about Leslie and Emmanuel, many would say that they had heard that Emmanuel was pimping Leslie out, and he was there that weekend to help her find some clients. And they still let this woman's apartment be the kids' area for the party. Leslie and Emmanuel would both deny to police that he was pimping her out. Police asked Leslie something along the lines of if Emmanuel was running girls, and she said something along the lines of, oh, he wishes.
Does he work girls?
No, he wishes he could, I think, but he doesn't.
Now, maybe Emmanuel truly was just making the Craigslist posts out of the goodness of his heart. But unbeknownst to Leslie, Emmanuel had quite the checkered past himself. He had known gang affiliations, multiple felonies, had dealt with substance abuse, and had been in and out of drug treatment facilities. At 16, he was convicted of second-degree robbery for mugging another teenager. At 17, he was convicted of unlawful possession of a firearm for firing a gun into a wall of the group home he was living at. Shortly after that, he was convicted of misdemeanor coke possession. When he was 20, he was convicted of third-degree child rape for assaulting his dad's girlfriend's 15-year-old daughter. According to court documents, Emmanuel and the 15-year-old child had hooked up about 10 times prior to the assaults. I'm not going to say the previous times were consensual because she was a child and below the age of consent in Washington. On January 15, 2003, the victim stated that a half hour before the assault, Emmanuel had been waving a gun around their apartment complex, and that her and Emmanuel had had an argument. He later tried to kiss her and make up, which she refused. He then grabbed her by her coat and pulled her into the apartment he was staying in and didn't allow her to leave. He choked her, slapped her across the face, and assaulted her. The following morning, January 16th, she called 911 and reported the assault after a friend encouraged her to do so. At first, Emmanuel completely denied the allegation, but when he was told there would be DNA from the SANE exam, he then admitted to sleeping with her, but maintained that it was consensual. He took an Alford plea for third-degree child rape. An Alford plea is where you're pleading guilty, but you're still maintaining your innocence while conceding that the state has enough evidence to convict you. Convoluted, if you asked me. Emmanuel was sentenced to 48 months, and afterwards he would have to register as a sex offender. The assault happened in January 2003, and he hadn't immediately been sent to prison because in December 2003, he committed first-degree theft when he robbed an unknown man walking down the street. According to court documents, Emmanuel approached the man from behind and said, "Give me what you got." When the man said he didn't have anything, Emmanuel pulled out a handgun from his waistband and pointed it at the man's face, and again demanded he hand over anything he had. The man gave Emmanuel the $130 in money orders he had on him, and then ran to a nearby gas station and called the police. Emmanuel was apprehended a month later. He was sentenced to 18 months for that felony. During his incarceration, he had 2 infractions for a mail and phone violation and for communication with a minor. He wrote a letter to a 15-year-old girl, not the same one he had assaulted. He had gotten this girl's information from another inmate, and Emmanuel wrote the girl a letter trying to initiate a romantic relationship. Emmanuel said he had no idea he was writing to a minor. Despite this, he got paroled and was released on November 8th, 2006, and reported that he would be staying at his grandmother's house. Emmanuel was listed on the sex offender registry as a level 1 offender, meaning he was considered low risk. This is insane to me, but in the state of Washington, most level 1 sex offenders are not visible on the public sex offender registry. So if you go and you try to look up Emmanuel Fair, he doesn't pull up. After his release in 2006, Emmanuel paroled out to his grandmother's, and for a while, he seemed to be staying out of trouble. His parents had been in and out of his life. His mom died when he was 16, and his grandmother really seemed to be the only consistent person in his life. His grandmother had mostly raised him. But in February 2008, Emmanuel's grandmother, Alice Fair, passed away. On top of losing one of the most important people in his life, Emmanuel now no longer had a place to live. He registered as a homeless sex offender, telling his parole officer that he was living under a bridge. Despite what he told his parole officer, he wasn't living under a bridge. He was couch surfing and mostly stayed at a childhood friend's home, Isaac Porter Sims. Isaac grew up and lived in the house right behind Emmanuel's grandmother's. Emmanuel and Isaac had known each other since they were 7. They shared a love for music and were trying to get their rap careers off the ground. The house belonged to Isaac's mom, Sarah Porter, and she allowed Emmanuel to stay in the basement, near Isaac's recording studio. The last time Emmanuel had updated his registry status was in December 2007, and then the parole board lost contact with him. So 2 warrants were issued for his arrest: a felony warrant for escape of community and a misdemeanor warrant for failure to register as a sex offender. These warrants were still active at the time of the Halloween party. I'm not sure how much Isaac and his mom knew about Emmanuel's criminal history. In an interview with police, Isaac would say that Emmanuel had lived with him for about a year, but yet he had no idea that the whole time, Emmanuel was an unregistered sex offender. The details aren't clear, but sometime around September 2008, Emmanuel was shot in the stomach during an altercation in his central Seattle neighborhood. Leslie would tell police she knew Emmanuel had been shot in the stomach, and because of that, he didn't really drink because it would upset his stomach. This is mentioned in the Suspect podcast. Whenever they brought it up to Emmanuel, he was really vague about it and just immediately wanted to change the subject. Emmanuel did drink and smoke some green at the Halloween party, but everyone there said he didn't seem intoxicated. Though I will say, if you are drunk yourself, it can sometimes be hard to gauge how drunk someone else is, because usually, as long as they don't appear to be drunker than you think they're fine. On Halloween weekend 2008, Isaac was going out of state to visit San Francisco. So Emmanuel had to find a different place to crash until Isaac returned. Emmanuel reached out to his online friend, Leslie Potts, and she offered for him to stay with her. Emmanuel arrived at the Redmond Bus Park and Ride on Thursday, October 30th, the day before the party. Leslie met him at the bus station after her waitressing shift ended, and they walked back to the Valley View. That first night, Emmanuel met Leslie's next door neighbors, Nicole and Ricardo, and learned of the party everyone would be throwing the following night. Costumes would be mandatory, and Emmanuel didn't have anything. Ricardo worked construction and loaned Emmanuel his tool belt and knee pads. Roger, the apartment maintenance manager and fellow party co host, loaned him a hard hat. Also, that Thursday, Nicole was supposed to drive Arpana to pick up her motorcycle from Shiny Side Up Motorcycle Service in Redmond. The bike had been in the shop since October 25th. Arpana had been trying to learn how to change the oil and reached out to a couple of people in the Pacific Northwest Riders Group for help, and someone stripped the oil cap. So she had to take the bike to a professional. After 5 days in the shop, it was ready to be picked up, but due to rush hour traffic after work, Arpana and Nicole weren't able to make it to the repair shop prior to closing. So Arpana called and made arrangements to pick up the bike at a later time. They wouldn't be able to pick it up the next day because of the party, so Arpana made tentative arrangements to pick up the bike Saturday afternoon, and Nicole agreed to drive her and pretty much told Arpana to just let her know when. The next day was Friday and the day of the Halloween party. Arpana woke up and went to her job at EMC and excitedly told her coworkers about the party she was helping host. She told a couple of coworkers that they should stop by, but no one from her job would end up going. After work, between 6 and 7:30, Arpana, Nicole, and Nicole's friend Rachel went to grab some last-minute things for the party. Now, Rachel didn't live at the Valley View apartments, but her boyfriend Sean, and their two daughters, and their roommate Mike would all be attending the party and spending the night at Nicole and Ricardo's apartments. Rachel and Sean were close friends of Ricardo and Nicole's and often hung out at the Valley View apartments. Nicole and Ricardo and Rachel and Sean were all young parents as well. That night, the guys took the kids trick-or-treating while the girls went to the store and got everything set up for the party. The girls first made a stop at Safeway. Arpana only drank wine, so she bought 2 bottles of red. They were trying to find dry ice, but Safeway was out, so they went to Fred Meyer's, which was also out. The three then went to Papa Murphy's Pizza. Arpana picked up 3 cheese pizzas for the party. In Rachel's interview with the Suspect podcast, she told the host that they also made a stop in an adult store, Lovers, to buy some fishnets to complete their costumes. When the girls made it back to the Valley View, Nicole and Rachel went to the first floor and started setting up. Arpana went up to the third floor to start cleaning and setting up her place. Arpana didn't help set up anything on the first floor, and no one helped Arpana clean or decorate her apartment before the party. This is really important to remember once we get to the evidence portion in this case, because police asked Emmanuel, Leslie, Nicole, Rachel, Ricardo, Sean, pretty much everyone who was involved in the party setup, if anyone helped Arpana decorate her place. And all of them said no. Arpana decorated her apartment herself. Emmanuel did help Leslie decorate her place, and he helped set up stuff outside on the first floor, but he did not help Arpana decorate her place. The party was scheduled to start at 8:30 p.m., but it didn't really get going until around 9:30. At 8:30, Nicole went upstairs to check on Arpana. Arpana was still cleaning her kitchen and hadn't put on her costume yet. Nicole told her to hurry. People were starting to show up. The party started and mostly centered around Nicole and Ricardo's apartment and Roger's apartment on the first floor. The food table was set up outside near their apartments as well. Around 9 p.m., Arpana, now in her costume, came downstairs and invited everyone up to see her place. People came and took pictures in front of the haunted forest backdrop and cobwebs hung in her living room. Around this time, Arpana met and chatted with Emmanuel Fair for the first time. During the party, she showed Emmanuel and other people videos on her laptop in her bedroom. Most were political comedy spoofs. Recently, Arpana had been talking a lot about politics and the upcoming presidential election. Many noted it was something she was very passionate about, but I would venture to say that at the time, most people were talking about politics. This was 1 week before the 2008 presidential election between Barack Obama and Joe Biden versus John McCain and Sarah Palin. Seems like Arpana wasn't a Sarah Palin fan. Many people during the Halloween party said that she showed them videos of late night comedians making fun of Palin. Throughout the night, there was a lot of transition between Arpana's apartment on the third floor and the other hosting apartments on the first floor. I've never lived in an apartment, but I have to imagine if you lived on the second floor and you weren't participating in the party, that had to get very annoying. Not all the residents at the Valley View took part in the party. Some just stayed in their apartments during the festivities. I wouldn't say the party got exceptionally rowdy, but there were a few fights that night. There was drinking involved, and some people got very drunk. The neighbor on the other side of Nicole and Ricardo, Chris Cutler, his girlfriend Michelle, and his stepbrother Neil Marshall attended the party. Chris and Michelle lived at the Valley View, but Neil did not. Chris dressed up as Jesus, Michelle as the devil, and Neil didn't really wear a costume. He wore a button down shirt and tie with jeans and just said he was Jesus' secretary, which bothered some of the party hosts because they wanted costumes to be mandatory. Neil then ruffled some more feathers by challenging people to an arm wrestling challenge while in Nicole and Ricardo's apartments. Neil won a few rounds and started referring to himself as the champion. Rachel's boyfriend, Sean, then asked Neil if he wanted a shot at the title and offered to arm wrestle him. Neil told Sean he had already won 4 rounds. Well, Sean and Neil arm wrestled and Sean won. Sean and Neil had gotten into a little argument during the party as well. Sean had dressed up like a robber, complete with a toy gun. Earlier in the party, Neil was holding Sean's toy gun and, I'm assuming jokingly, asked him what it would take to get the gun back. Sean replied, a right hook. Neil eventually gave the gun back. Emmanuel and Neil also arm wrestled, and the two got to talking and hanging out. Supposedly, they talked about fighting, and the two went out to the parking lot so Emmanuel could show Neil some fighting moves. It was all in good fun. Neil, not knowing what he was doing, accidentally nailed Emmanuel in the lip and caused him to bleed. Emmanuel says the incident happened, but that he didn't get mad about it and just brushed it off because he knew it was an accident. There were some other partygoers who remembered seeing Emmanuel grabbing at his mouth during the party. Lead detective Brian Coates would later question Emmanuel about Neil accidentally giving him a bloody lip, and Emmanuel denies it.
You know, and this whole thing is crazy. And there's even a third guy that I'm interested in. Do you remember Neil? He was like Jesus' disciple. I think he was wearing a
The guy in
shirt.
the red
He was
shirt.
kind of a pain in the butt. Everyone was kind of, I think he was drunk, being obnoxious. if I recall right, you said you were arm wrestling with him a
Yeah,
little bit.
and he
Yeah.
kept trying to arm wrestle once, and then he kept talking about let's keep going, let's keep going.
Yeah. Do you remember that dude?
Yeah, I remember him.
Okay. Some people we talked to said that he might have even bloodied your lip. You guys were like messing around, sparring or something. Does that ring a bell?
I think we was playing around, yeah, but I don't remember him bloodying my lip though. He might have though.
You might have.
Yeah.
Was it a bad deal? Somebody said one person said you're bleeding all over the place. The other person says, no, it was nothing. It was just.
It was nothing.
And you were cool about it.
And I was
it was an accident.
like, he kept saying, "Oh man," I'm like, "It's all good. It's all good." You know what I'm saying?
Do you remember anything else about that guy? Did you talk to him much?
No, I didn't really talk to him much. Just, I remember him trying to arm wrestle. You know what I'm saying, for a long time and stuff.
I don't know about you, but I think getting a bloody lip at a party would be a pretty memorable event, especially since he wasn't drinking all that much due to his stomach injury. So it's not like he just got so drunk he didn't remember it. And I know this might seem like a weird thing to focus on, but it does become relevant once we start talking about the evidence in this case. Emmanuel's DNA will later be found on items that could potentially suggest he was involved in Arpana's murder. His DNA will later be found mixed in with Arpana's blood on her bathrobe. During the party, the bathrobe had been hanging on the back of the bathroom door. One of the explanations later given by Emmanuel's defense is that after getting this bloody lip, he went to the bathroom in Arpana's to clean up. Now, let's say this accidental punch in the parking lot really did happen and he got a bloody lip. Why would he walk all the way up to Arpana's apartment on the third floor to clean up instead of just going to one of the apartments on the first floor that would have been closer to the parking lot? He was also staying at Leslie's apartment, so wouldn't it make more sense for him to go clean up in Leslie's apartment? And Emmanuel never tells police, oh yeah, Neil bloodied my lip in the parking lot, and then I went up to Arpana's and I cleaned up in her bathroom. That must be how my blood got there. Like, Emmanuel never says that. But eventually, that is what his defense will argue at trial. But yet, you never hear that come from Emmanuel. Around midnight, Arpana invited people back up to her apartment to eat the pizzas she had picked up earlier. Nicole remembers that while heating up the pizzas, she looked at the stove clock and saw that it was 12:07 a.m. Nicole's parents were there too, and Arpana chatted with Nicole's dad about Taekwondo. After finishing the pizzas, a lot of people began to migrate back downstairs. Around 12:30, 1 a.m., Ricardo began popping balloons in Leslie's apartment. Leslie got upset, and the two began to argue. A few partygoers broke up the argument, and Ricardo walked away towards the apartment complex storage unit. Sean and Mike followed him, and Sean was still reprimanding Ricardo for popping the balloons. It turned into a physical altercation between Sean and Ricardo. Emmanuel had followed behind the guys and broke up the fight and helped defuse the arguments. Because of the fight, Roger decided to call it a night. He closed his apartment to partygoers and went to bed. It's about 1 a.m. at this point, and a lot of partygoers had already gone home. And it was pretty much just some of the Valley View residents and a few people who were planning on spending the night at the complex. It didn't take long for Sean and Ricardo to apologize to one another, and the guys headed back up to the party, which had again migrated up to Arpana's. So Sean, Ricardo, Mike, and Emmanuel headed up there too. Around 1:30 a.m., Sean got into an argument outside Arpana's door. This time with his friend and roommate, Mike. They were fighting over roommate stuff, Sean not feeling like Mike was pulling his weight and being disrespectful. But like the other argument, this one was short-lived. Around this time, Arpana's next-door neighbor, Cameron Johnson, returned home. Cameron hadn't planned on attending the Halloween party and didn't have a real costume. He had assumed the party would be over by the time he got home. He changed into a Microsoft t-shirt and put on a red devil's mask as a makeshift costume. Earlier that night, Cameron had had dinner with his parents at 5:30 at Ivers and Fremont's. Other than dinner, he didn't really have plans set for the night. His family left the restaurant around 8ish, and he first tried to get a hold of his cousin Christina by calling her and driving over to her apartment. The two had previously discussed possibly meeting up and hanging out that night. Christina didn't answer and wasn't home, so he instead met up with a group of friends at a bar in Belltown. Cameron stayed a couple of hours, had some drinks, and then headed home. He arrived back at the Valley View sometime around 1 a.m. and saw that the party was still going and decided to join everyone in Arpana's apartment. Cameron strolled into Arpana's bedroom and saw that she was showing Neil a political comedy video on her laptop. Cameron joined them and began chatting with Arpana. Neil left the room shortly after. Neil would later describe this to police and said that Cameron seemed a little possessive of Arpana. Others said that during the party, it seemed like Neil and Arpana had been flirting with each other a little. Not long after Cameron arrived at Arpana's, he invited a group of people over to his apartment next door to take a shot. 2 or 3 of the guys, including Emmanuel and Neil, went over. Around 1:30 a.m., Rachel and Leslie went downstairs to smoke cigarettes on Leslie's porch. Arpana then leaned over her apartment balcony and called for the two girls to come back up to her place. Rachel and Leslie both went up one last time. Arpana was on her porch with Emmanuel and one other male that neither girls remembered. It's speculated that it might have been Cameron. They didn't stay up there for very long. Leslie decided to call it a night and cleaned up a little bit outside before going to bed. It actually upset some of the other party hosts because Nicole and Ricardo had purchased most of the food for the party, but Leslie took all of the leftovers back to her apartment and kept them. Leslie went back to her apartment and went to bed alone. Emmanuel was still upstairs hanging out, so Leslie left her front door unlocked so Emmanuel can get in later. Leslie wasn't sure what time he got in and said that Emmanuel slept on the couch that night. Rachel said that around 2:18 a.m., the few remaining people began to leave Arpana's for the last time and headed back down to Nicole and Ricardo's apartment. Arpana went with them. Cameron and Emmanuel did not join the group at Nicole and Ricardo's. The two guys had started talking about music. Cameron made techno beats on his computer, and Emmanuel said he helped others write song lyrics. Emmanuel and Cameron went downstairs to Leslie's apartment and grabbed one of Emmanuel's CDs. They then went back up to Cameron's apartment so Emmanuel could see the software Cameron used to make music. Cameron's computer activity showed that the music software, Fruity Loops, was used between 2:27 and 2:43 a.m. This was the only time that night Fruity Loops was accessed. After looking at the computer, the two went out to the parking lot to listen to the CD in Cameron's car. Both say they listened to a few songs and were out there maybe 20 minutes. So if the two immediately went out to Cameron's car to listen to music after getting off of the computer at 2:43 a.m., then that means they were together until around 3:03 a.m. Though usually when people are drinking, which they both were, you're not the most time efficient. It's easy to get off task, and things just usually take longer, especially if you're just hanging out. So I would say it's very likely that they were together later than 3:03 a.m. That night, both Emmanuel and Cameron had interesting cell phone activity. At 2:02 a.m., so 25 minutes before they accessed the Fruity Loops software, Cameron added Arpana's number to the hot list on his phone. He had a BlackBerry Pearl, and on older BlackBerry phones, you could add contacts to a hot list, which would make any messages or calls from that contact a priority notification. I think it would give a special alert, and any calls or messages from that person would bypass silent mode.
How about you? Do you know how to? If you wanted to get girls last minute, would you know who to call?
No.
You would. So if
I
Cameron
never-
was like, he wanted to get some that night, and you would say, "Hey, I could hook you up."
No,
You couldn't do that,
no,
and he didn't talk about wanting to hook up with anybody.
no, not at all. We just talked music. We didn't talk about nothing else.
Between 1:54 and 2:37 a.m., Emmanuel made four calls to a woman named Mandy, and during this time, she returned his call once. Mandy is not her real name, and I'm not going to give out her real name. She was an online prostitute. Emmanuel would later give varying statements to police, but he ultimately admits that he was trying to invite Mandy over that night, but not because he wanted to use her services, but because he knew she was homeless and wanted to help her out for the night.
I think you meet a lot of people on MySpace,
Yeah,
don't you?
yeah.
Okay. Do you remember
'Cause-
talking to her during the party that night?
No, but when I was at Leslie's house, she I remember talking to her, and one of the things I was talking to her about was she didn't have nowhere to go. You know what I'm
Like
saying?
homeless or?
Yeah,
Oh.
like at for that day or whatever, and she said something about she's just walking around or something.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? So
How many times did you talk to her? Do you think that night?
I think throughout the whole time I was over at Leslie's house, I talked to her quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. What does she do for a living? What's her
I
job?
don't really know.
Is she a working
I
girl?
just um I actually I'm not even sure. She looked kind of like when I met her, she looked kind of like she like did drugs or something.
Oh. Well, looking at the phone records, you talked to her actually throughout the night.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell? What would you be
I
talking
mean,
to her about?
Um, I think I did try to invite her to come out to Leslie's house.
Oh. Okay.
I think I did.
Because she was
Because she
homeless,
didn't
or
have nowhere.
because?
Because she didn't have nowhere to stay for that night.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then because she was telling me something about her sister, I was like, well, why don't you go to your sister's? And then she told me about something about her. I think it was Denny's, sitting up in Denny's till they kicked her out or something. You know.
Is it possible you were calling to hook up with her that night? Come out for what she does?
No, not at all.
And how about somebody you met at the party said, "Hey, could you hook me up with someone tonight? Been looking at all these half-naked women all night long, and
No,
I'd like to
what's-
hook up with somebody."
you
I
know-
mean, you know people like that out there. I know
But-
that.
Yeah, but you know what's crazy is even people like Nicole and them was trying to say, like, I guess I don't know what Leslie was saying, like I'm her pimp or something. That wasn't the case. You know what I'm saying?
Like, Emmanuel's also homeless himself. Like, that's the whole reason he's at the Valley View, is because the place he usually stayed with Isaac Porter Sims, who was going to San Francisco for the weekend. That's the whole reason he was at Leslie Potts' apartment. So if Emmanuel was trying to get a hold of Mandy, not out of the goodness of his heart, but to solicit her services, that makes you think he had a place for her and him to go. And I highly doubt that was Leslie's apartment. Leslie kind of had a thing for Emmanuel, but it wasn't reciprocated. She was shocked nothing went on between the two of them that weekend, and Emmanuel would later tell police that Leslie complained that he hadn't given her any that weekend. One thing that immediately stuck out to me in the last portion of the police interview is that Emmanuel mentions that Mandy had been at a Denny's that night. Well, Cameron will later say that the morning of November 1st, he stopped and had breakfast at Denny's, and there was a charge on Cameron's bank account for Denny's on November 1st. It was like $13 and some change. Bank statements don't have timestamps, and Denny's is open 24 hours. I never saw anything in the police file that shows that they verified what time Cameron went to Denny's on November 1st or that they even followed up with Denny's. If they did follow up with them, it never made it into the police file. Police would later speak with Mandy, and she didn't mention anything about going to Denny's that Halloween night. She said she spent Halloween at her cousin's house, hanging out around a 7-Eleven, and then riding around in a car smoking and drinking with a guy she had just met at the 7-Eleven. She also recalled getting multiple calls from a guy trying to get her to take a bus to the Redmond Transit Center, stating that he had multiple tricks lined up for her. But she said that she told the guy no because it was too late and she was too drunk. So I don't know if Mandy was ever at a Denny's. It doesn't appear police ever followed up with Denny's, and the only mention of Mandy ever being at Denny's comes from Emmanuel in this one police interview. Cameron does have a confirmed bank statement of going to Denny's on November 1st. However, his story is that he went in the later morning of November 1st around like 10 or 11 a.m. Can't confirm it just because I can only go off of whatever police put on the file. Just thought it was an odd thing to point out. At 2:52 a.m., Emmanuel called his friend Isaac Porter Sims, who was currently in San Francisco. He then called Mandy again at 2:56 a.m. and they spoke for 4 minutes. A minute later, at 2:57 a.m., Cameron tried to call Arpana. At 3 a.m., Cameron texted yo to an ex-girlfriend, Heather, who he would still sometimes hook up with. At 3:03 a.m., Emmanuel again called Mandy and spoke with her on the phone for 7 minutes. At 3:04 a.m., Cameron tried to call Arpana again. At 3:05 a.m., Cameron tried to call Heather. Cameron would later tell police he didn't really remember calling and texting Heather around 3 a.m., but remembers that he had fallen asleep on his living room couch and had awoken to certain noises coming from Arpana's, which then prompted him to text Heather. He even admitted to police that he was reaching out to Heather as a booty call. Cameron would initially tell police that he had called Arpana Saturday morning around 10 a.m. just to check on her. During a police interview on November 5th, Cameron showed officers the call records on his cell phone. There was no record of the 10 a.m. call, but there was record of the calls around 3 a.m. To which Cameron exclaimed, "Oh crap." During the same interview, Cameron would also tell police that Arpana was looking good that night, and if he had called her, it was probably to hook up.
One thing that is easy, should be easy for us to determine is, the cell phones, is it usually tells the time and date when calls were made.
Yeah,
So
I
when
can.
we get all those, her phone and
Yeah, you guys.
everybody's phone, it's kind of a nice way to fill in the.
Yeah, I can show you what mine shows if you want. Yeah, see, this is what mine shows.
So that shows that you. Is this made a call or a text?
That's a call.
That's a call. And what happens if you? Are there any options if you click on that?
It just goes to
Call
call.
Arpana.
Yeah.
View contact.
There's no menu or
How
anything.
about full menu? What does that do? Call. View history. How about view history? Oh. Yeah, maybe full menu again, and then view history. There we go. Okay, 302.
Yes. Oh crap.
Nice. Let me see that. So, looks like you called her at 3:02
Yeah.
and 2:56.
You don't remember that? So you called her twice that night,
Yeah, I don't remember.
which was the time you kind of heard maybe heard the sex noises,
Yeah.
but you don't remember calling her.
Mhm.
And you said you kind of called Heather, maybe it was just kind of a booty call.
Yeah. Well,
Any chance you were trying to hook up with Arpana that night?
I tell you the truth, possibly. Yeah. She was dressed really.
Looked pretty good.
Yeah, and I hadn't talked to her for a long time, so.
And you know what? Just so you understand it, there's no kind of moral judgment we're going to pass. You know what I mean? We just want to
I'm just kinda-
all the
yeah.
details. So,
Yeah.
so don't be afraid to just say, "Hey, she looked hot.
She
We're
did.
friends.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we could hook up."
Yeah.
So is that the case?
Yeah. Probably, if I had done it, it probably would. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, we know you called her,
Right.
and you called her twice. So,
You just got to be really straightforward.
Yeah, I am. I'm just nervous because I know how this looks right
I
now.
understand. Yeah,
That's why I asked
Yeah.
if she was looking, because I already knew the
Yeah,
answer.
she looked really good.
Yeah.
And yes, when I walked in, I had thought, wow, before that, I had never really, and I hadn't seen her for months. I had never thought about her like.
Cameron's late night calls and texts ended with his 3:05 a.m. call to Heather, but Emmanuel's continued. Between 3:48 a.m. and 3:51 a.m., Emmanuel called Leslie 3 times, but she didn't answer. At 3:52 a.m., Emmanuel called Mandy again, and they spoke for 9 minutes. He then called Mandy twice between 4:34 and 4:36 a.m., but she didn't answer. Between 4:43 and 4:48 a.m., Emmanuel called Audrey Lewis 3 times, and he left her at least one voicemail. Audrey, who was home and asleep at the time, didn't answer the calls or notice them until the next morning. Audrey and Emmanuel had met that night at the party, and Audrey had given Emmanuel her number. Audrey didn't live at the Valley View and had been invited to the party by Nicole and Ricardo. She later told police that she thought Emmanuel was cool and would have considered hanging out with him in the future. She said he was doing some light flirting with her, but she was just having a normal conversation with him. Audrey had also heard the rumor at the party that Emmanuel was pimping Leslie out. The next morning, Audrey checked her phone and saw the missed calls and that she had a voicemail from Emmanuel that just sounded like movement. She described the sounds as pants rubbing together and assumed he had just pocket dialed her. Emmanuel had just saved Audrey's number that night, and her name started with an A. So I can see how an accidental pocket dial could happen. But what could Emmanuel possibly be doing around 5 a.m. that would result in pocket dialing someone 3 times and leaving a voicemail that sounded just like movement? After the calls to Audrey, there was no further activity on Emmanuel's phone until he received a text message from Mandy at 8:41 a.m. on Saturday morning. Both Emmanuel and Cameron would give similar yet slightly contradicting statements to police. They would tell police that they had looked at the computer and listened to music much earlier in the night, while the party was still going on, around 1:30 a.m. But Cameron hadn't even arrived back to the Valley View until around 1:30. Emmanuel told police that after listening to music in the parking lot, he went back to Leslie's around 2:30 a.m. and didn't know where Cameron went after that. In initial tellings, Emmanuel would say that after watching some TV that he actually got in bed with Leslie and that she was already asleep. In some tellings, Leslie would say this too, though she would later admit that Emmanuel asked her to say that. Ultimately, both would say he slept on the couch that night, but other nights during his stay, he had platonically slept in her bed. If Emmanuel is either on Leslie's living room couch or in her bed next to her, why would he be calling her at almost 4 in the morning? If he's supposedly asleep, why would he be calling Mandy and Audrey too? Cameron's story closely mirrored Emmanuel's, except Cameron said that after they left his car, Emmanuel went back upstairs with him to his apartment to hang out for a little bit longer. Emmanuel left shortly after, and Cameron didn't know where he went after that. Now, during the time Emmanuel and Cameron were hanging out, Arpana had gone down to Ricardo and Nicole's apartment with everyone else around 2:18 a.m. Nicole and Ricardo decided to call it a night and went to bed in their room. They told the remaining people that they were welcome to crash in the living room. At this point, it was Arpana, Rachel, Sean, Audrey, Mike, and Neil still there. Arpana and Rachel had started talking about politics and women's rights. Arpana said that women in America have so many more opportunities and privileges than women in other countries. Rachel disagreed and said something along the lines of how women had to work hard for everything they have here and how Rachel had a hard childhood. The two girls got upset, and Arpana told Rachel that she didn't understand what she was saying. Nicole could hear the disagreement from her bedroom while her and Ricardo were starting to fall asleep. Talking politics after hours of partying and drinking never goes well. Upset and crying, Arpana left to go back to her place around 3 a.m. Neil said that his stepbrother Chris, who lived next door, called him at 2:58 a.m. to say that he was going to sleep. Neil said that Arpana had left a few minutes after Chris's call. Neil left about 15 to 30 minutes after Arpana and started walking home. Rachel and Sean have been very blunt about their dislike for Neil, but they gave him $5 to stop and get cigarettes on his walk home. Neil was seen on CCTV footage at a 7-Eleven purchasing cigarettes and beef jerky at around 4 a.m. This was no short walk home. It was 7 miles and took him about 3 hours to get home. Neil had previously had trouble with DUI, so he wasn't driving at the moment. And again, this was 2008. You couldn't just order an Uber off of your phone. When Neil was leaving the apartment, he saw a guy from the party standing outside. Neil would say he didn't remember what the guy looked like, but remembered that he had been at the party. Arpana's other next door neighbor, Kyle Rose, had been home that night, but hadn't attended the party and stayed inside the whole time. People had knocked on Kyle's door trying to get him to come join, but he decided to spend the night in. Earlier in the night, during the party, Kyle heard Arpana talking to someone on her balcony. He heard a male voice say something along the lines of, "seeing the devil." He couldn't really make out all the words or the gist of the conversation, but assumed that they were talking about drugs. Some have made a big deal about this considering Cameron was wearing a red devil's mask that night. But I will say at least 3 other people at the party also wore devil costumes, so. Kyle would also say that around 3 a.m., he heard a male shout from the parking lot, "Arpana, where are you going?" Kyle saw a car's taillight turn on and assumed Arpana was saying goodbye to someone in a car.
I didn't hear her answer. She didn't seem to answer. I think she was either saying goodbye or something to someone in a car because I saw taillights coming on about that time. Couldn't tell what kind of car we were. I think I went over to the window and looked out because I'm kind of protective of my car. I got hit and ran, I think earlier on in the year, and filled out an accident report of that. And with the party going on, the craziness, I worried about my car because insurance only covered so much of it, and I had to pay $600 and something out of my pocket. So I'm kind of protected when drunks and stuff are around my car and stuff. And so I was looking out the window. I saw the taillights come on, and I assume they left. I think they were backing out and left, and I never heard her answer, but I think she was back to the party. She just came on over quietly. So by that time, after that, they kind of migrated downstairs. I could hear them outside vaguely, but it was getting to be 3:34 in the morning. I finally was sick, and they were calling it quits just about.
So Kyle hears Arpana talking to someone in the parking lot around the same time she would have been walking back upstairs to her apartment, and when Cameron and Emmanuel would have been listening to music in Cameron's car. Kyle would say he could still hear some partying going on around 3:30, 4 a.m., but assumed it was winding down by that point, and he went to sleep. The neighbor on the other side of Kyle, Jeffrey Paris, returned home from work around 3 a.m. and saw a man about 5'10, 5'11, mid 20s with dark hair, olive skin, a goatee and mustache, and wearing a dark orange fleece pullover, leaning up against the wall near Arpana's door and smoking a cigarette. Arpana's door was open, and the man was talking to someone inside. Jeffrey didn't hear what they were saying, and at the time, he didn't really care. He didn't think that this would become relevant in a murder investigation later on. He had just finished up a late night shift and wanted to get home. Jeffrey also didn't really socialize with his neighbors and would tell police that he wouldn't be able to recognize Cameron or Arpana if he saw them at the local grocery store. The description of this man was strikingly similar to Cameron, and Jeffrey says that it could have been Cameron, but he wasn't entirely sure. He didn't get a good look at the guy. At 3:29 a.m., someone created a file in Arpana's profile folder on her laptop. This was most likely Arpana, and as the last time she most likely used the computer. At 6 a.m., someone attempted to change the administrative password on her computer. At 8:01 a.m., there was an attempted login failure. At 8:34 a.m., there was a low battery notification on the computer, and at 8:48 a.m., the computer ceased all activity. Between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., neighbor Kyle Rose awoke to a growling breathing noise, followed by a thud coming from Arpana's.
34, yeah, party was done. So I guess I felt comfortable enough just kind of going to my bedroom. And so I was in my bed sleeping, and I think I woke up about 8 or 8:30. Like I said, I sleep in short spurts sometimes, and just the way I sleep. And I heard a very disturbing, loud, like, it sounded almost like a dog, but I'm pretty sure it was Arpana's voice. I mean, what I would picture her to be making this noise was Arpana. And it sounded like she was breathing, but it was like a growling breathing.
Did you try to mimic it?
Yeah, it was like like a growl though.
Right. And how long did that go on for?
I'm gonna say maybe 20 seconds or.
So if you had to count the growls, there's quite a few.
Yeah, maybe less, 10 seconds. I remember hearing about, well, yeah, maybe it was long and deep. It was.
Right.
And it's probably for, I mean, I'm just estimating 10 to 20 seconds. And then after that, I heard like a thud on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could picture, I mean, a party, people getting drunk. I figured maybe she had a boyfriend over or something and was in sex and was in her bed and fell out.
Right.
Onto the floor.
It sounded to you like something that heavy?
Yeah, it sounded like a bot. It honestly did. Like something.
So not something hard, but just something heavy.
Yeah, something like as if it fell on a carpeted floor.
Okay.
Out of bed, let's say.
Okay.
A thump.
Arpana's body was later discovered face down on the floor near the foot of her bed. Investigators would come to the conclusion that Arpana was most likely killed at or around the time Kyle heard those noises. Afterwards, Kyle heard the sound of water running for about an hour. He didn't think much of these sounds, assumed Arpana either had a guy over or she had awoken, gotten sick from drinking too much the night before, and then went to take a shower. All of the bedding had been stripped from Arpana's bed. Her white comforter would later be found soaking in the bathtub. The comforter had her blood on it. At the time, he didn't know it, but Kyle had overheard Arpana's murder and her killer's attempt to clean the crime scene. It was the first of the month, meaning that rent was due. So around 9 a.m., Kyle left his apartment to go drop off his rent check, and he noticed Arpana's door was slightly ajar. He went to his apartment and left again around 4:30 p.m. and saw that her door was now closed. Kyle didn't think much of this at the time and went about his weekend. A lot of residents got an early start that Saturday morning, cleaning up after the party. Rachel, Sean, their daughters, and roommate Mike all woke up around 8 a.m. and left about 15 minutes later. Nicole woke up sometime between 8 and 9 a.m., looked out the window, and saw that most of the food and trash from the night before had already been cleaned up. Ricardo said he went outside sometime between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. and saw Emmanuel. According to Ricardo, Emmanuel looked like he had just woken up. The guys cleaned up various trash and other items left outside from the party. Leslie isn't sure what time she woke up on Saturday, but knows it was before noon. And she found a couple of odd things in her apartment. Her black hoodie was by her bed and wet. It didn't smell, and she described it as wet, like it had been rained on. She hadn't worn it the night before and didn't know why it would have been wet. She thought maybe Emmanuel had borrowed it, but she didn't think it would have fit him. She said the jacket was kind of cropped and a little small on her, so she didn't ask him about it. That morning, she also found a gold condom wrapper on her kitchen counter. Leslie wasn't immediately forthcoming with this information to police and didn't tell them until after she had already learned of Emmanuel's previous charges.
You know what's weird is like I was like after that party, like like when things happen like that, you kind of look at people like, what did I just do? Did I invite the wrong motherfucker over to my house? You wanna know what's weird? I had this black jacket, a black hoodie that was wet that morning.
It was wet.
Yep, and I was trying to figure out did I take a shower? Did I get something wet? It wasn't raining. Was it raining that night on Halloween? I had a black jacket that was wet. It didn't smell of anything. It was wet. That's what I remember. That's the only thing weird I can remember.
That was Saturday morning?
Yeah, my black jacket was by my bed, and I didn't wear it. The black hoodie is too, and I was like, did he wear it? But it's too small for him. It's like a little black, like that white hoodie kind of, but it's black. And it was kind of shorter. Like one of the other girls, I shouldn't probably be wearing it, but I do. I wouldn't even go through my mind.
That he had something to do with
Yeah.
it? Why?
Because that wouldn't go through my mind. Anybody that was at that party. That was just
How
like
about
a
knowing...
freak thing. Like, I thought that since all of our doors were open that somebody had saw her go in. Like it was just a miscellaneous person. Then I started reading things about the Indian thing. Then I was like, I don't know. And now you're here with this. And that's just the first thing from my mind.
How about knowing what you know about Emmanuel now?
I really don't know that much more about him now. I know that
You said you looked at what his charges were.
Failure to register as a sex offender, but those two different things, And now that you're telling me other things, I don't.
Well, what if sex was involved in the murder?
Oh, there was a condom wrapper in my kitchen.
There was.
Yeah, I thought it was just garbage from someone's pocket or something.
When did you find that?
That morning.
As a
You said
a
something
condom
sex
wrapper?
involved. Condom wrapper, a gold one,
Where was it at?
in my kitchen
On the counter, or
on the counter. That's why I was like, "Did you get down last night?"
did you ask him that?
No, I just threw it away. I thought maybe it was something that fell out of my garbage can or something.
Was it a brand you used?
It was just wadded up. Like you take a condom out of a thing and it was wadded up.
Something that strikes me as odd, Leslie, is you found your your hooded pullover.
Yeah, it was wet.
Wet by the side of your bed.
Yeah.
And you find an empty condom
Condom
wrapper
thing, yeah.
on the kitchen counter, and you have one person staying with you that weekend. Why wouldn't you ask him about those things?
I thought that maybe, I don't know what happened to the coat. I was like, did I spill something? Something happened? I didn't know. I was like, whatever.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say, hey, Emmanuel, you know why my coat's wet? Or,
Why would-
hey, Emmanuel,
No.
did you score last night? How come you wouldn't ask him any of those
I
questions?
honestly, because the condom wrapper could have fell out of my garbage can.
Onto the kitchen countertop?
No, it could have fell I have my own garbage underneath, and there would be a possible condom wrapper in there, and it maybe it fell and he put it on top of the counter or something if it was on the ground. So that's what I thought.
Yeah, but if you
I wouldn't
found,
think that he scored, I'm like, but
Is it the first thing you thought is, did he
yeah,
score?
did he
get
score?
lucky?
Then I was like, it probably came out of my thing, because who did he score with? Not me.
Okay, but I'm thinking if most people find whatever it is, it's a wadded up piece of garbage on the floor, wouldn't you just put it back in the garbage can? Why wouldn't you put it on the kitchen counter?
My garbage was pretty full. That's why I thought maybe it might have fell out. So it was either one of the two things.
Do you remember the brand? You said it was gold.
It was gold. That's Magnum.
Would you have Magnum Trojans in your apartment?
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Leslie described finding her jacket that morning wet like it had been rained on. Because remember what Kyle Rose heard that same morning? He heard the growling breathing noises, someone falling out of bed, and then the shower turning on. And then Arpana's comforter is later found in the bathtub. Now just imagine you're wearing a jacket, you turn on a shower, and you get sprayed by the shower head. I can see how that would look like you just got rained on. Just saying. When she found the gold wrapper, she initially thought that maybe Emmanuel had gotten lucky the night before. But then she thought, Who could he have slept with? He wasn't sleeping with her. The wrapper was the brand of condom she kept in her apartment. So she then assumed that maybe it had fallen out of her kitchen trash can and someone just set it on the counter. Rachel said she had to return to the Valley View apartments between 2 and 4 p.m. on Saturday to pick up some things that they had forgotten and saw Ricardo, Nicole, Leslie, and Emmanuel still cleaning up. A lot of people were cleaning up that day, so no one would particularly notice or think it's suspicious if someone was making multiple trips to the dumpster. Sometime that day, Nicole was supposed to drive Arpana to go pick up her motorcycle. Around noon, Nicole called Arpana and left her a voicemail to see if she still needed the ride to get her bike, but never heard back. Nicole didn't think much of this and assumed that either Arpana had made other arrangements to get the bike, or that she was still upset over the argument she had had with Nicole's friend, Rachel, the night before. The motorcycle shop owner found it odd that Arpana never came to pick up her bike, or that she didn't at least call him to reschedule a pickup date. Cameron would later tell police that he called Arpana around 10 a.m. on Saturday morning just to check on her and see how she was doing. But there had been no record of this call happening. Between 10:10 a.m. and 12 p.m., Cameron's laptop was in use, and at 11:20 a.m., he printed out pawn shop locations in the area. The pawn shop printout would later be found in a search of his car. There was no record of Cameron pawning anything, and when his picture was shown to local pawn shops, no one recognized him. Cameron would say that Saturday morning he had breakfast at Denny's, and there was a transaction on his bank account for Denny's that day. At 12:25 and 12:26 p.m., Cameron received and responded to a text message from a friend, Steve Schiffman. Steve was throwing a last-minute party in Everett and invited Cameron to come. That afternoon, Cameron took a long drive. He told police that at first he was driving into work, but then ended up at the Canadian border. Turns out Cameron was not scheduled to work that day, and even if he had been scheduled to work, who randomly decides on the way to work to just drive over 100 miles to the Canadian border? He tried to cross into Canada saying he just wanted to go exploring. He didn't have a passport on him, and border agents found his story of just wanting to explore to be sketchy. So they searched his car. This is such a bizarre thing to do. Police would end up interviewing a lot of Cameron's family members, and all of them had the same consensus. They thought it was weird that he would randomly drive up to Canada the same morning his next door neighbor was murdered. Cameron didn't have any reason to be in Canada, and he had only been to Canada once as a child. But for what it's worth, Cameron was extremely forthcoming with this information to police. He immediately told them about his spontaneous road trip to Canada and his car being searched by Border Patrol agents. He didn't try to hide anything. At least not this. The Denny's thing is so weird to me. Everything Cameron did that Saturday was weird. Printing out pawn shop locations, having a sit down breakfast at Denny's, and then driving 100 miles to the Canadian border and then trying to cross without a passport. I can see printing out pawn shop locations and then going to Canada, but then breakfast at Denny's just seems so random. And then, according to Emmanuel, Mandy, the Craigslist prostitute that he was calling all hours of the night, was potentially at a Denny's during the early morning hours of November 1st. Again, Mandy was questioned and she never mentioned anything about being at Denny's. Maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing. Border agents wouldn't find anything suspicious in his car and just turned him away. Cameron then went to Steve's party in Everett. Cameron arrived around 8 p.m., and everyone there said he seemed fine and there was no indication he was previously injured. At the party, Cameron struck up a conversation with one of Steve's friends, David Miller. Cameron and David had both been wrestlers in high school, and the two began to wrestle outside for fun. Steve's wife took pictures. David and Cameron had just met that night, and when David was later questioned by police, he said Cameron was the one who wanted to wrestle. David thought it was odd, but wrestled him anyway. Cameron ended up injuring his leg and elbow. This is relevant because 2 days later, when Cameron is questioned by police, he walked with a noticeable limp. Police would question David, and David confirmed that Cameron injured his elbow and knee during the wrestling match, but said it seemed fakey, and didn't think he could have been injured as bad as he made it out to be. David and Cameron had exchanged numbers and spoke on the phone the following day, November 2nd. Cameron called David to tell him that he was going to go get his injuries checked out by a doctor. Outside the wrestling incident, everyone at Steve's party said Cameron seemed normal and fine. Cameron slept over at Steve's and didn't leave until around 6 p.m. Sunday night. On Sunday, Emmanuel and Leslie would end up watching sports and having KFC for dinner at Nicole and Ricardo's. Emmanuel spent the entire weekend at the Valley View, and everyone said he seemed perfectly fine and was chill to hang out with. No one that weekend checked on Arpana's apartment or knocked on her door. Though it had been a few years since Arpana had been back to India, she spoke with her family on the phone daily. Her family quickly became alarmed after not hearing from her all day Saturday. Her parents reached out to 2 of her closest friends who also lived in the US, but who didn't live in Washington, to see if they had heard from Arpana. They hadn't. When Sunday came and passed with no contact, the Jinagas were certain something was wrong. Monday morning, Arpana didn't show up to work and missed a team meeting. Her boss, Muhammad Ali, didn't think too much of it. A couple months prior, Arpana had missed work after having too wild of a night out and had been hospitalized for alcohol poisoning. On Friday, Arpana had been talking about throwing a party over the weekend, so Ali just assumed it was another similar situation. But once he was contacted by Arpana's dad, he knew something was wrong. Around 10 a.m., Dr. Jinaga reached out to an old student who was currently living in Seattle, Jay, and asked him to go check on Arpana. Jay first tried to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. Jay told Dr. Jinaga that on his way to work he would stop by Arpana's apartment. Jay arrived at the Valley View at around 8:45 a.m. He had only been there once before and remembered she lived on the 3rd floor, but didn't remember which apartment was hers. Jay wandered the 3rd floor and then saw Cameron exiting his apartment. Jay asked Cameron if he knew Arpana and which apartment was hers. Cameron said he knew her and told Jay that she lived in the apartment next door to his. Jay knocked on Arpana's door, and it immediately swung open. Cameron had already started walking out to his car in the parking lot, and Jay called him back. The door had been kicked in, and the 2 men entered the apartment. The place was messy with Halloween decorations, and there was a strong smell of bleach. Bleach stains were on the carpet in the living room and hallway. Jay called out Arpana's name, but received no answer. The guys looked around and saw no one. They continued down the hallway and saw the bathroom door open. In the tub was a white comforter with what looked like blood on it. They continued down the hallway and saw the bedroom door open. Arpana was face down on the floor at the foot of the bed. The majority of her body had been covered with a green blanket. The 2 men stood in the doorway. Jay continued to call out Arpana's name with no response. Jay asked Cameron if they should enter the room and check on her. Cameron said no. Jay then called 911.
Emergency police paramedical.
Hello?
Can I help you?
Hello? Yeah, this girl is in danger. Okay, please come.
There's what?
No, there is this girl fell down. Okay? And somebody broke her apartment and she's totally unconscious.
Okay, what's the address?
What is the address? 8946. What is the name of the apartment? Valley View. Valley View, Redmond.
Okay, 8946. Why didn't you put the address?
8946 Valley View Apartments, Redmond. It's on what road is this? Redmond Woodendale Road. Okay? We did not even go there. We did not even go close to her. I don't know what's going on.
Okay. What unit
Okay.
number is it?
We did not even enter the room. Okay? Because she suddenly fell down and there's no clothes on her.
You need to calm down, okay? Is she conscious right now?
No, we did not go there. We did not go to her. I have another guy in the apartment. He's next to her.
Okay.
No, he's next to me.
Okay, can I talk to him?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
Can you talk to him? Hello?
Hi there, what unit number is this?
It's an apartment, but it's got a normal address, and it's I think
There's no unit number?
A946 Redmond Woodville Road.
Okay, so there's no unit number then?
No, that's the actual apartment number.
Okay. Now, I can understand you a lot better, so I'm going to ask you some questions, okay?
Okay.
How old is this person?
I think she's 24.
Okay.
Yeah, 24.
And what happened?
I have no idea.
Is she conscious right now?
She doesn't look conscious, and we were yelling, and she didn't say anything.
Okay.
And her door looks like it's been kicked in.
Okay. Is she breathing?
I don't know. I didn't even get close to it.
Stay in the phone. We're going to get the police department on the way, okay? Hold on.
Okay.
At 8:52 a.m., Officer Knowles with the Redmond PD responded to a call for an unconscious female. He arrived at the Valley View at the same time as the ambulance. Officer Knowles spoke with both Jay and Cameron. Jay was visibly shaken by the scene and was genuinely worried about Arpana, while Cameron seemed pretty calm and kept his hands folded in front of his body. Officer Knowles entered and cleared the apartment before allowing EMTs to enter and check for signs of life. But it was too late. Medics were told to clear the residence, and it was now considered a crime scene. More officers arrived on scene and questioned Jay, Cameron, and the other neighbors. While speaking with police, Jay's phone kept ringing. It was Dr. Jinaga. Jay dreaded the idea of telling him about the death of his daughter over the phone. So he called 2 family members in India and asked them to go tell the Jinagas in person. News quickly spread around the apartments. Officers began knocking on each apartment door and asking residents when was the last time they heard from Arpana and if they had noticed anything unusual over the weekend. After hearing of the murder, Nicole went to Leslie's work, which was in walking distance from the complex, to tell her the news. Given the circumstances, Leslie's boss let her leave work early. When Leslie got home, Emmanuel was asleep on the couch. She woke him up and told him what happened and that police were outside. An officer then knocked on the door. Emmanuel asked Leslie not to tell him that he was there. He had warrants. At the time, Leslie didn't know what the warrants were for, and she didn't ask. She stepped outside to speak with police. She told them that she lived alone and didn't mention anything about her house guest. Emmanuel laid low the rest of the day. At night, with police still at the complex, Emmanuel snuck out of Leslie's apartment, walked to the bus station, and went back to Central Seattle. After this, Leslie and the Redmond police would have difficulty getting hold of Emmanuel. Police spent hours documenting and processing the crime scene. It was evident that the killer had spent some amount of time in the apartment after the murder and tried to clean and destroy any evidence that could link them to the crime. The only things that had been taken were Arpana's phone, camera, and wallet, which were never recovered. The front door had been kicked in. Parts of the broken door frame and lock were on the floor. Oddly, a blanket from Ricardo and Nicole's apartment was laying near the front door. The blanket had been photographed at Ricardo's and Nicole's during the party. Towards the end of the party, Rachel got chilly, borrowed the blanket, and wore it around her shoulders. Rachel remembered taking it up to Arpana's during the party and forgetting it there. Decorations, plates, and empty bottles were still scattered around the place, but there was a distinct smell of bleach. The carpet had what appeared to be bleach stains. The living room coffee table had a white crystalline residue that later testing showed was consistent with dried bleach. On the couch's armrest was a roll of black duct tape and a long used piece of tape. On the used piece of tape, there were multiple strands of Arpana's hair, her saliva, and brown threads and elastic. In the kitchen, on a paper plate of half-eaten pizza, there was a pair of torn brown panties. The brown threads and elastic on the tape was consistent with coming from them. Testing on the underwear would find motor oil and Arpana's blood and saliva. She had been gagged with her own underwear. The bathroom countertop had the same white crystalline residue as the coffee table. Soaking in the bathtub, there was a white comforter with Arpana's blood and a shower cap. The comforter had been on Arpana's bed during the party. In the hallway outside the bedroom laid a bottle of toilet bowl cleaner, open and dripping on the floor. The worst of all was in the bedroom. All of the bedding had been removed. The mattress also had the white crystalline residue, consistent with dried bleach. Arpana was found laying face down on the floor at the foot of the bed. Both of her arms were bent at the elbows and slightly above her head with palms facing down. Her hair covered her face. She was completely undressed and a green blanket covered most of her body from her mid-shoulders to her ankles. A used tampon was found on the floor nearby. Her hands and the carpet beneath were covered in blue toilet bowl cleaner. The carpet beneath her had bleach stains. Her body, mostly the lower half, was covered in a shiny liquid that was later determined to be motor oil. Motor oil was also found on other items in the apartment, like the underwear and paper towels. Motor oil isn't flammable, but it appears the killer tried to light the crime scene on fire with it. Burn marks were found on the paper towels, carpet, and blankets. Now imagine if motor oil was flammable, or if the killer had used something that was flammable. This was not a very big apartment complex. People lived here. Children lived here. Not only is this killer okay with doing the horrific things that they have just done to Arpana, they're okay with setting all of these people's homes on fire just to cover their tracks. They're also spending quite a bit of time in the apartment in order to commit the crime and then to clean up afterwards. Because Arpana had been covered with a blanket, this led investigators to believe that maybe someone who knew her was responsible. Covering a body can sometimes indicate remorse or that the killer knew the victim. Police not only searched Arpana's apartment, they also searched the complex dumpster, and thankfully the trash hadn't been picked up yet. In the dumpster, they found the red cape that Arpana had worn with her Little Red Riding Hood costume, and the black satin sheets and pillowcase that had been on her bed. The cape and sheets had been burned too. In the dumpster, they also found a Kohl's bag that contained Arpana's torn red bathrobe that had blood on it, a bath mat, a bootlace, and a bottle of mostly empty Castrol brand motor oil. A receipt for the motor oil was found in Arpana's apartment. She had purchased it for her motorcycle. It was also consistent with the oil found throughout the crime scene. After processing the crime scene, police packaged up the evidence and sent it off to Washington State Crime Lab for DNA testing. DNA testing is a slow process, and it would be months before investigators would hear back. The following day, November 4th, the King County Medical Examiner conducted the autopsy and determined Arpana had died of asphyxia due to ligature strangulation. She had ligature marks on her neck, multiple areas of blunt force injuries to the top and side of her head, forehead, cheek, lip, and chin. Multiple of her teeth had vertical fractures, and she had bruises on the inside of her right and left thighs. The rape kit came back negative, but her bruising, state of undress, and the removed tampon indicated that there was a sexual motive to the crime. She was not intoxicated at the time of death. Her blood alcohol was at 0.06, less than the legal driving limit, and no drugs were in her system. Her time of death was placed between 3 and 9 a.m. on November 1st, 2008. It was ruled a homicide. In 2009, the Redmond PD heard back from the Washington State Crime Lab. Emmanuel Fair's DNA was found on the used piece of tape, on a swab collected from Arpana's neck, a used tissue found in the bedroom, and on the red bathrobe in the dumpster. His DNA on the bathrobe was found mixed in with Arpana's blood. A partial match for Cameron Johnson's DNA was found mixed with Arpana's on the bottle of motor oil recovered from the dumpster. Cameron's DNA was also found on a cigarette butt in the hallway outside his and Arpana's apartment. But that wasn't all the crime lab found. Aaron Gertler's DNA was also found on a towel in the bedroom. Neighbor Josiah Lovett's DNA was found on the bootlace found in the Kohl's bag in the dumpster. Aaron had been in an intimate relationship with Arpana, and his alibi for the night of the murder checked out. He hadn't been to Arpana's place in about 2 weeks. Josiah Lovett lived at the Valley View with his wife Priscilla. Him and Priscilla hadn't attended the party. They spent Halloween drinking at Josiah's dad's bar, Pete's Tavern, and then went home and to sleep. They spent Saturday at home together and went to church on Sunday morning. It's not certain where the bootlace originally came from, but Josiah said he used old shoelaces in his garden, but that none of them had ever gone missing. Aaron and Josiah's alibis checked out, and both were ruled out as suspects. In the first few days of the investigation, police primarily focused on speaking with those closest to Arpana: friends, co-workers, neighbors, and everyone who had attended the Halloween party. They asked if anyone at the party was showing interest in Arpana. Multiple people said that her and Neil Marshall seemed to be flirting. Police were at first interested in Neil, but quickly ruled him out after confirming his alibi. He was seen on surveillance at a 7-Eleven and then walked 7 miles home. Police were quickly suspicious of Arpana's neighbor, Cameron Johnson. He lived next door, he had been there during the party, and when the body was discovered. He had called Arpana and reached out to an ex-girlfriend in the early morning hours of November 1st. He readily admitted that Arpana was looking good that night and that he was looking to hook up after the party. He admitted that things didn't look good for him. He told officers on Saturday morning that he drove over 100 miles to the Canadian border and tried to cross without a passport. Police also took notice of the fact that Cameron walked with a noticeable limp. He had told him he had injured his elbow and leg when wrestling with someone at a party he had attended the night of November 1st. Police questioned Cameron on November 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Police questioned Heather. She had met Cameron about 5 years prior on an online dating website. They dated briefly, and even though that they were no longer dating, they would talk and hang out often. She hadn't been awake at the time Cameron had called and texted her on November 1st. She said she wasn't surprised that Cameron hit her up looking to hook up, but stated he had never called her at that time before. Her and Cameron had started talking almost every day following the Halloween party. She said Cameron often sounded stressed. He didn't talk too much about the homicide investigation, but he told her one time that he was scared and thought that there was someone in his apartment complex he couldn't trust. Now, whether Cameron's involved or not, if your next door neighbor was just murdered and the police hadn't yet solved the crime, I think most of us would be distrustful of those around us and our neighbors. Police would later question one of Cameron's friends, Philip Hughes. Philip had met Arpana once and believed that Arpana and Cameron were just friends. A couple of days after Arpana's body was discovered, Philip went to go visit Cameron. Cameron told him he was worried police were looking at him as a suspect and that he was suspicious of a guy he had met at the party and listened to music with. During the conversation, Cameron asked Philip, "What if I did it in my sleep?" Police had built enough probable cause against Cameron, and on November 6th, Redmond PD executed a search warrant on his apartment, phone, and car. Since Cameron wasn't home at the time officers showed up to search his place, they kicked his door in. They did this at 6:30 p.m., and none of the other residents even opened their doors or stepped out at the sound of the door being kicked in. So if you were thinking, how is it possible none of the neighbors heard Arpana's door being kicked in? Well, apparently none of them heard Cameron's door being kicked in either. The apartment maintenance manager, Roger Duffy, had been in the parking lot at the time officers were searching Cameron's apartment. Roger made a quick, temporary repair on Cameron's door so it would lock after the search warrant was completed. While repairing the door, Roger remarked to officers, "It sure is strange how Cameron hasn't been home. He is always hanging around here every day, and I haven't seen him around here once since Arpana was murdered." Cameron had been gone pretty much all day Saturday, driving to the Canadian border and then going to his friend's party in Everett. He stayed over at his friend's place Saturday night and didn't leave until around 6 p.m. on Sunday. He presumably went back to the apartment Sunday night, and then on Monday morning, he's there when Arpana's body's discovered. Cameron didn't stay at the Valley View again after that, and instead stayed at his Uncle John's house until going to stay at his dad's place. Cameron's family would say they found it odd that he wouldn't even return to the apartment to move his stuff out. His cousin Christina kept offering to go with him to get his stuff, but he never wanted to go. In Cameron's apartment, police would photograph, but not collect, a lighter sitting on the kitchen countertop. The lighter left a brown residue outline on the countertop, which some have theorized could have possibly been motor oil. And remember, Cameron's DNA was found on the empty can of motor oil in the dumpster. Because of this, some people have criticized the police for not collecting this lighter, and when this case does go to trial, Emmanuel's defense will make a very big deal about it not being collected. One thing they did collect, though, was Cameron's journal. In one entry from December 2006, he wrote, "I wish my mind would chill out and just let me live my life in this world and not in my head. I can't make decisions without regret, it seems. I try weighing everything out in my head and can't determine which outcome I want. I tend to let others make decisions for me." He also often wrote about forgetting things and being off his medication. On November 7th, officers located and seized Cameron's Acura. At around 10:25 a.m., it was towed to the Redmond Police Department evidence area to conduct the search warrant. In the vehicle, they found Cameron's laptop and the Google search printout for the pawn shops that he had printed on the morning of November 1st. Again, Cameron hadn't pawned anything, and when his picture was shown to local pawn shops, no one recognized him. The same day his car was seized, Cameron retained defense attorney John Henry Brown. On November 10th, police seized Cameron's BlackBerry. Also on November 10th, Leslie Potts again met with police to help identify people and photos from the party. She identified her coworkers that she invited, and she identified Emmanuel as E, and said that he had been her house guest for the weekend and had attended the party. She said her and E weren't romantically involved, and that he lived somewhere in central Seattle, but she didn't know the address. She did give officers his phone number, though. Investigators had difficulty locating E for an interview. Many of the other partygoers said they just knew him as E or Emmanuel, and that it had been the first time that they had ever met him. Some said they heard a rumor that Emmanuel was Leslie's pimp, but pretty much everyone said Emmanuel seemed like a cool guy. Only two people at the party really had anything negative to say about Emmanuel, and that was Leslie's coworkers Sarah Wade and her boyfriend Jeff Roning. The two hadn't been at the party long, only an hour and a half before leaving to go to a different party, and they only ever went inside Leslie's apartment. Jeff didn't like that Emmanuel asked Sarah if he could hold her leg to pose for a photo. I will say a lot of people were posing a little risque for photos at this party, but I can definitely see how a guy would be offended if you asked to take that type of photo with his girlfriend. Police became even more interested in tracking Emmanuel down when they learned he had spent the end of the party hanging out with their suspect, Cameron Johnson. On November 14th, the Redmond police sent out a request to other police departments to help identify Emmanuel. It included pictures of him from the Halloween party. E was quickly identified as 25-year-old Emmanuel DeMelvin Fair, who is currently wanted on a felony warrant for escape of community custody and a misdemeanor warrant for failure to register. Emmanuel was the only Black person at the party, and some have poised that maybe police were biased against him because of his race. But I think if anything biased the police against Emmanuel, it was probably his criminal history. When you hear about horrific crimes like this, you usually assume it's committed by someone who had a violent history, which Emmanuel did. Arpana's murder also appeared to be sexually motivated, and at the time of the murder, Emmanuel was wanted for failure to register as a sex offender. If police did not thoroughly investigate Emmanuel, they would not be doing their job. But of course, it takes a lot more than someone's previous criminal history to prove that they committed this current crime. On November 17th, police again interviewed Leslie Potts. She admitted that Emmanuel was inside her apartment when police first questioned her and that she helped sneak him out of her apartment later that night. At the time, she knew he had warrants, but not what they were for, and she didn't want to get him in trouble. She told officers that she had recently chatted with Emmanuel over Facebook and let him know that police were wanting to talk with him. She said Emmanuel told her that he had misplaced his cell phone in the back of someone's car, and as soon as he got it back, he would call police. 3 days later, on November 20th, police set up surveillance outside Isaac Porter Sims' house, where Emmanuel was living. A man resembling Emmanuel entered the residence at around 5:30 p.m. and didn't leave the home again until 5:30 the next day, at which point officers approached him, positively identified him as Emmanuel, and arrested him on his outstanding warrants. Once Emmanuel was in the back of the car, officers wasted no time. They read him his rights and began questioning him about the Halloween party on the drive to the police station.
Hopefully we'll make good time here. We'll finally hit the frickin' freeway.
There we go. This is Detective Harding. It is November 21st and it's approximately 17:30 hours. I'm in a car with Detective Coates and with Emmanuel Fair. Emmanuel, would you state your full name and your date of birth?
Emmanuel DeMelvin Fair, 8808.
And
8883, I'm sorry.
August 8th of 1983?
Yes.
And do I have your permission to record this conversation?
Yes.
So what we're going to talk about is just kind of the timeline of the events that occurred on Halloween, what led up to those events, and then shortly after Halloween.
The interview continued once they got back to the station. Emmanuel was cooperative with police and agreed to speak with them and be recorded. He told them how he met Leslie through MySpace and stayed over at her place from Thursday to Monday, Halloween weekend. He said everyone at the party seemed cool. His account of the party lined up with what everyone else had already told the police. He told officers he had met Cameron in Arpana's apartment.
How about where did you spend during the party? Were you in just one apartment, or where were you?
No. I was in. What was it? I was in Ricardo's. It was like everybody went from Ricardo's, Leslie's, Rogers, and the girl upstairs, Arpana.
Okay.
And I went next door to that girl's house, Arpana.
Okay.
That's when I met. That's okay. The dude next door. I think his name is like Cam. Cam. Because he told me, he said his name's Cam Beats because he does beats and stuff.
Oh, okay. So you met him?
Yeah.
Where did you meet him at?
At the party.
And do you remember where you were at when you met him? Was it like at Leslie's place or?
I think I met him upstairs at Arpana's.
Okay. Somebody introduced you to, or how did you guys?
No, I think Arpana said this is my neighbor, and everybody was saying hi to him.
Okay.
You know, about music and stuff, and he let me listen to some of his beats, and I actually gave him a CD.
He told officers that this happened earlier in the night, while the party was still going on, and that he believes he went to bed around 2:30 a.m., which is inconsistent with his phone records and Cameron's computer activity. Emmanuel denied returning to Arpana's apartment after the party ended or having anything to do with her murder. Emmanuel was booked into county jail but was only held for a few days before being released. His parole officer warned him that Redmond police were looking at him for murder. But at the time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge Emmanuel or Cameron with Arpana's death. They needed to wait until the DNA results came back from the Washington State Crime Lab. On January 30th, 2009, Redmond PD received the DNA results back on multiple pieces of evidence. Emmanuel's DNA was found mixed in with Arpana's blood on her bathrobe from the dumpster. His DNA was also found on used tissue paper from the bedroom floor. A partial match for Cameron Johnson's DNA was found mixed with Arpana's on the can of motor oil from the dumpster. On June 16th, the red bathrobe, the motor oil can, prints from the mattress, the used piece of duct tape were sent off for additional testing to Bode Technology, a private lab in Virginia. Nothing came of the mattress prints. No DNA could be found on the motor oil can. However, the red bathrobe and the used piece of tape came back as a full profile match for Emmanuel Fair. Police would send off additional pieces of evidence to Sorensen Forensics, a private lab in Utah. A partial DNA profile was obtained from a swab of the front of Arpana's neck. The partial profile was a match for Emmanuel Fair. In summer 2009, Emmanuel found himself behind bars once again for failing to register. This time they didn't just hold him in county for a few days. He was sent to Kent Correctional Facility for a 43-month sentence. Police would interview him on August 19th, 2009, and his story of the Halloween party pretty much stayed the same. He claimed he barely spent any time with Cameron. He denied trying to get a hold of a prostitute and denied any involvement in Arpana's murder. The day before, on August 18th, Detective Brian Coates, Detective Ron Harding, Prosecutor Jeff Baird, and crime analyst Michelle Brown met with Cameron Johnson and his attorney, John Henry Brown. During the interview, they told Cameron and his attorney about the partial DNA match on the oil can. Detective Coates hinted that maybe Cameron hadn't committed the crime alone.
Well, you have been, and I think it's probably been made clear to you, it's you've been a challenge for us.
Yeah.
And it's, honestly, it has hurt our case in the past. When you have, you're the last person to attempt contact with her before she was murdered. You're the only one we've spoken to that had any kind of a romantic interest in her. She was looking good that night, I believe you said.
Well, yeah, but I've never.
I know.
Yeah.
But you called her at 3 o'clock, and that could have been, as you told us, for a booty call or to hook up with her if she would have answered. You didn't recall if you went next door to knock on the door or not. It seems like somebody would have remembered that. We found your DNA on the oil container, which was very instrumental in our crime scene. You started to go to work, you said, but you rarely work on Saturdays. But you went on a road trip, ended up at the Canadian border. Looks weird. You know, we had pictures of you Saturday night at Steve Schiffman's house having a great time, kicking back. You get injured. We're thinking, good story, because Arpana probably injured her attacker.
I know.
And then, just out of coincidence, you're the one that finds her body.
I know. It's crazy.
And then you get a lawyer.
It's
Shouldn't hold that against it.
Well, sorry.
Against the list of innocent people who've done that. Many of whom you don't even know about.
well,
But you know what I'm saying is a lot of things, a lot of your behavior, a lot of your actions made us focus on you. We probably told you that before. We had the behavioral science unit from Quantico out and reviewed the case. We have a couple people of interest. They said, we like Cameron for it. He did everything we'd expect a murderer to do after a murder. You kind of had this high for about 24, 48 hours, having a good time at Schiffman's house, and then you're kind of curled up in the fetal position at Uncle Gasparetti's house, you know, after the body's found, so kind of a low again. So they're looking at this thinking, yeah, you guys got the right guy. The reason why I'm telling you all that, maybe for the benefit of Mr. Brown too, is just we know who did it. We just don't know if he had help or not. And anything you can do to shake a memory loose that could help you be a better witness for us and not be such an asset for the defense when this thing goes to trial. Because right now that's what you are. You are the reasonable doubt for the guy that we're going to take to trial.
Yeah, I really wish I had something I could, but I just I don't know.
And I think I've already said too much.
No, not from my perspective.
Of course not from here.
The interview ended shortly after that, and Cameron didn't turn on his alleged accomplice. And Emmanuel never turned on Cameron. Emmanuel was again interviewed on September 24th, 2009. And at first, he didn't want to speak with Detective Coates.
This is Detective Coates with the Redmond Police Department. We're speaking with Emmanuel Fair, reference case number 080203331. The date is September 24th, 2009, and it is 9:13 a.m. We're at Seattle Police Headquarters in Seattle, Washington. Emmanuel, are you aware that you're being recorded in this room?
Yes, I was told that by you and another officer.
Okay. Do we have your permission to record your voice?
No.
We don't?
No.
Do you have any heartburn if I advise you of your rights while the tape recorder is going, and we can go from there?
Go ahead and do what you have to do, sir.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to an attorney. You have the right to talk to an attorney before answering any questions and making any statements, and to have an attorney present with you during any question and the making of any statements. If you cannot afford an attorney, you are entitled to have an attorney appointed for you without cost to you if you so desire. You have the right to exercise any of the above rights at any time. Do you understand each of these rights that I read to you?
Yes.
Having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk to me now?
No.
And the time is 9:15 a.m., still September 24th, 2009. I'll turn off my tape recorder.
He then quickly changed his mind.
This is Detective Coates with the Redmond Police Department. Still speaking with Emmanuel Fair. The date is September 24th, 2009. The time is 9:18 a.m. We're at Seattle Police Headquarters in Seattle, Washington. Emmanuel, I turned the tape back on. Are you aware that you're being recorded right now?
Yes.
Do I have your permission to do so?
Yes.
A couple minutes ago, I advised you of your constitutional rights, and you chose to invoke your right to remain silent. Do you recall me reading the rights to you?
Yes.
Do you understand each of those rights that I read to you?
Yes.
Having these rights in mind, do you wish to talk with me now?
Yes.
Okay. Did I make you any promise or threaten you in any way to give a statement today or talk to me?
No,
Are you doing this on your own?
Yeah, I just don't understand, what you told me when the tape recorder went off. So.
And what I had told you when the tape was off was that my intention was to take the case to the prosecutor, recommended that they charge Cameron with murder.
And what, me as a, like, accessory or something?
And charging you for murder as well. Like I said, I've spoken with Cameron a couple of times.
Yes.
Okay.
According to the Suspect podcast, to this day, Detective Coates believes Emmanuel and Cameron committed the crime together. It was now January 2010, over a year after Arpana's murder, and still no arrests had been made. Police were doing everything they could to try to gather more evidence, and they were willing to accept any help that they could get. Maybe even help from the beyond. Redmond Investigations Commander Terry Morgan was at a conference in Seattle where he met psychic medium Allison Dubois. Dubois is an author, and the TV show drama show Medium is based on her. The show follows Allison Dubois, a medium who works as a consultant for a district attorney's office, using her psychic abilities to help solve murders. Investigations Commander Morgan put Dubois in contact with Detective Coates, who was the lead investigator on the Jinaga case. Coates was pretty skeptical about the idea of consulting with the medium and didn't put much stock into it, but agreed to give it a shot. Dubois asked to be sent the victim's name, description of where her body was found, and photos of the victim not taken at the crime scene. Dubois replied on February 10th, 2010. Arpana said her throat was obstructed, so it was hard for her to breathe. She also makes me feel trauma to the head. It's two men that lived around her that she trusted. One served as a lookout. They had been in her apartment before and knew the layout. Feels like killing had something to do with her getting too independent and standing up to the males she didn't agree with their lifestyle. The good news is that it's someone she knows and that has been talked to and gave a fake alibi. They back each other up so it's solvable. They tried to appear cooperative. She says she was very smart. She could have been a doctor one day. And a hard worker. Seems like she feared males in her family and around her. The second man did help to restrain her. She says Lady Neighbor knows more than she's saying. Two men are also involved in drugs as they got high that day, so they may have a petty record for dealing, and she shows a souped up car that they may street race, and have warnings for that. She didn't see him approach her initially, so either he came from behind and crossed his arm over her throat, applying pressure to subdue her, or her eyes were closed. All I know is she says she didn't see him when he grabbed her. She also keeps talking about her phone records, which I'm sure you've already checked. She says they tried to make it look random, but it wasn't. One of the perps didn't know she would be killed. He panicked in the moment and helped. She says she was getting ready to uproot her life and move on, that school was important to her, so she may have been going back to school or transferring. I only had a few minutes to take a look at this and shoot me back questions. All my best, Allison. Who knows how much she actually knew about this case beforehand? I don't think this case was very well covered. It might have been well covered locally. I know it was featured on one episode of Seattle's Most Wanted at the time. But if Dubois did not know anything about this case other than what she asked for, that is super eerie. Dubois helped them pretty late in the investigation after they had already had all their DNA evidence, after police were already leaning towards the belief that Cameron and Emmanuel may have committed this crime together. So I don't think she told them anything new or anything that they didn't already know. It seems like she kind of just confirmed what they already suspected, if you can even confirm that through a psychic reading. Let me know what your thoughts are on psychics and true crime cases. I've never actually really deep dived a true crime case that had a psychic help in it. This is the first one, and I will say her email. You know, when I've read other articles talking about how police had Dubois help them in this, they make it sound really ridiculous. But then if you actually read her email of what she said, you're like, oh, that actually fits a lot with the evidence of what police are currently believing in the case. So, didn't really, her email itself didn't seem all that ridiculous. The whole drag racing thing and souped up cars, I have no idea what that's referencing to. That part was weird. But everything else seemed pretty spot on with the police's investigation, at least up until this point in our timeline. On May 11th, 2010, police and prosecution again interviewed Cameron in the presence of his defense attorney. Cameron was given immunity. Anything he said couldn't be used against him. However, if he ever testified in court and contradicted his previous statements, that could be used against him. But Cameron stuck with his original story. On October 29th, 2010, King County Prosecutor's Office charged Emmanuel Fair with first-degree murder for Arpana's death. In the filing, Emmanuel was accused of breaking into Arpana's apartment and committing the crime with sexual motivation. He wasn't hard to track down for his arrest, as he was only 13 months into his 43-month sentence. He still had to finish out his current sentence, but bail for the murder charge was set at $5 million. Emmanuel didn't have money for an attorney, let alone bail. He was assigned public defender Ben Goldsmith and remained in custody while he awaited trial. Cameron Johnson has never been charged with any crime in connection with Arpana's death. The prosecution's position was that there was enough evidence to prove Emmanuel was the primary actor and that Cameron may have participated, but there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges against Cameron. And I kind of think that maybe that's why it took so long for them to bring charges against anyone. They didn't have much evidence tying the two men together. Could two essential strangers really commit such a horrific crime together and then never turn on one another? The strongest thing tying the two men together and to the crime was that the bathrobe that contained Emmanuel's DNA and the can of motor oil that had Cameron's were found in the same shopping bag in the dumpster. The Halloween party was the first time they ever met and only time they hung out. They talked about music, looked at software on Cameron's computer, and listened to a CD in the car until around 3 a.m. Both were calling women in the early morning hours of November 1st. But police believed that the noises Kyle Rose heard around 8 to 9 a.m. was when Arpana was most likely killed, approximately 5 hours after Cameron and Emmanuel were last known to be together. There's no evidence they ever spoke to each other after that night, and they never turned on one another. Emmanuel waived his right to a speedy trial, and since he couldn't post bail, he was in prison for almost 7 years before his first trial began. During that time, Emmanuel wrote to various authors and journalists, telling them of his innocence and how a high school buddy of his, that you may know as Macklemore, even met with the King County prosecutor Dan Satterberg to try and get him out of prison. Yeah, Macklemore, thrift shop guy. Bet that wasn't on your bingo card. Emmanuel would eventually write to journalist Matthew Scherer, and thus season 1 of the Suspect podcast was born. The first trial began on Valentine's Day 2017, lasted until April, and ended in a hung jury. Detective Coates called it when he said that Cameron would be reasonable doubt for the guy they took to trial. King County Prosecutor's Office only charged Emmanuel, despite the evidence that could also implicate Cameron in the crime. During pretrial hearings, prosecutors posited that Cameron may have assisted Emmanuel commit the murder and described him as an uncharged accomplice, which the defense immediately objected to. The court granted the motion by the defense to prohibit the state from claiming in opening statements that Emmanuel and Cameron may have committed the crime together. If the state believed 2 people committed this crime, then they should charge both of them. They couldn't charge only one and then use the evidence implicating his uncharged accomplice against him. Now, I don't have a law degree, I'm not a prosecutor, I am just a girl with a laptop who posts true crime videos to YouTube. So take my opinion for what it's worth. But I just think that the only chance the prosecution had of convicting either of these men was they had to charge both of the men. In the Suspect podcast, they interview one of the prosecutors, Ellen Ellert, and she talks about the decision to only charge Emmanuel and not Cameron. She said she wasn't really sure about the extent of Cameron's involvement, and she said something along the lines of his DNA was on the can of motor oil, which may have implicated him in the aftermath or cleanup, but that didn't mean he took part in the crime. Ellert also said that Cameron's defense would then be able to argue that it's Emmanuel's DNA on all the primary pieces of evidence linked to the crime. Which is true, there is a lot more DNA evidence linking Emmanuel to the crime than there is linking Cameron to the crime, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence against Cameron. There's the early morning phone calls to Arpana, his spontaneous trip to Canada, him getting injured at a different party right after, and then his weird statements to police. Like, Cameron did not do himself any favors in his interviews with police. Like, at trial, Emmanuel's defense was able to present Cameron as an alternative suspect to the crime. Cameron was called by the defense to testify, but he could only answer a limited number of questions before invoking his right against self incrimination. The state couldn't directly tell the jury that they believed the two men may have committed the crime together. At trial, Emmanuel's defense was able to present Cameron as an alternative suspect to the crime. Cameron was called by the defense to testify, but he could only answer a limited number of questions before invoking his right against self incrimination. The state couldn't directly tell the jury that they believed the two men may have committed the crime together. After both sides rested their case, the prosecution proposed that for deliberations, the court give the jury a standard instruction defining an accomplice as the following. A person is an accomplice in the commission of a crime if, with knowledge that it will promote or facilitate the commission of the crime, he or she either solicits commands, encourages, or requests another person to commit the crime, or aids or agrees to aid another person in planning or committing the crime. The word aid means all assistance, whether given by words, acts, encouragement, support, or presence. A person who is present at the scene and ready to assist by his or her presence is aiding in the commission of the crime. However, more than mere presence and knowledge of the criminal activity of another must be shown to establish that a person present is an accomplice. The prosecution asserted the definition was necessary to counteract the defense's argument that jurors had to decide whether it was Emmanuel or Cameron who killed Arpana. Prosecution wanted to use the accomplice definition only to suggest that the two men might have killed Arpana together, not to prove that they actually did. The defense opposed giving the jury this instruction, stating it wasn't necessary to define accomplice for jurors because the state was not utilizing an accomplice theory as a basis to convict Emmanuel. The court sided with the defense. Prosecution was even barred from telling the jury that evidence implicating Cameron doesn't exculpate Emmanuel, because that teetered too closely to mentioning the accomplice theory. During defense closing arguments, they told the jury that any evidence of Cameron Johnson's involvement in the murder was reasonable doubt that Emmanuel committed the crime. Just like the prosecution predicted, not long after deliberations began, the jury sent a question back to the court. Is it reasonable doubt if there is a second person involved in the act? The trial court did not answer the jury's question and instructed them to reread their instructions. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a mistrial was declared. The prosecution immediately declared that they would retry the case, and Emmanuel was escorted back to prison. In a polling of the jury afterwards, at least 5 jurors thought Emmanuel and Cameron committed the murder together. In anticipation of the next trial, prosecution appealed to the court to reverse the ruling on allowing an accomplice definition and to allow them to refer to Cameron as an uncharged accomplice. The prosecution's appeal stated, The ruling erroneously permits the defense to mislead the jury into believing that evidence that two people committed a crime necessarily means that one of them must be acquitted. This restriction has the effect of adding another element to the state's burden of proof, that Fair acted alone in committing the murder. This is not required under the law for good reason. The fact that there is not sufficient evidence to charge an accomplice should not and does not require the state to prove that the principal committed the crime alone. I think the prosecution brings up a really good point here, because they're required to prove you committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Not that you committed a crime alone beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there is evidence that you potentially had an accomplice in the crime, but there's not enough evidence to bring charges or convict your accomplice, does that mean the prosecution shouldn't bring charges against you at all? Because essentially the prosecution only has three options here. They can either charge only Emmanuel, which is what they did. They can charge Emmanuel and Cameron, even though they feel they haven't met the burden of proof standard for Cameron, or they charge no one. What do you think they should have done? But the appeals court upheld the first court's decision. The prosecution couldn't provide the accomplice definition or present the accomplice theory. However, the court did agree that the first court's restrictions had gone too far and said that in the next trial, the prosecution could tell the jury that evidence implicating Cameron didn't exculpate Emmanuel, as long as the prosecution didn't assert that the two were accomplices. This is pretty convoluted if you ask me, because the only way that evidence implicating Cameron in the crime doesn't exonerate Emmanuel is if the two men committed the crime together. Like, that is the only explanation for that. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, so convoluted. So essentially, the prosecution can allude to the two men committing the crime together. They just can't directly state that to the jury. And they just have to hope that the jury is able to piece it together themselves. The second trial began, and this time around, Emmanuel had a new defense attorney, Catherine Edwards. This would be her first criminal trial, and she hit the ground running. The jury heard how Emmanuel's DNA on the tape could have ended up there from him helping decorate for the party. How his DNA could have ended up on Arpana's robe after he received a bloody lip from sparring with Neil Marshall in the parking lot. The robe had been hanging on the back of Arpana's bathroom door during the party. Emmanuel had been in Arpana's room and walked on her floor. Maybe his DNA ended up on her neck from secondary transfer, from her body being on the floor. Aaron Gertler's semen had been found on a towel in Arpana's room, and Josiah Lovett's DNA had been found on that bootlace. Maybe it was one of them. If investigators could easily explain away Aaron and Josiah's DNA on pieces of evidence, why not Emmanuel's? He was the only black guy there, and he had a criminal history. Were the police biased against him? Then there was all the evidence implicating Cameron Johnson. On June 11th, 2019, the jury returned with a not guilty verdict. I don't think the defense proved Emmanuel was innocent, but they provided enough reasonable doubt, which is all they needed. After nearly 9 years behind bars, Emmanuel was a free man. Double jeopardy applies, and he can never be tried again for this crime. And if the prosecution didn't feel confident in bringing charges against Cameron then, I doubt they will now. Most people who look into this case come away either thinking it was Emmanuel or Cameron, or the both of them. Some unknown DNA that was never linked to anyone was also found at the crime scene, so some have suggested that maybe more people were involved, or that maybe the killer wasn't Cameron or Emmanuel, but someone else entirely. Some theories are that maybe it was serial killer Israel Keys or serial rapist Mark Patrick O'Leary, who both may have been in the Seattle area at the time. O'Leary was ruled out via DNA testing, and I don't think Israel Keys is very likely, but I guess anything is possible. Now, while Emmanuel can never again be charged for this crime, this case is still going through the courts. 12 years after he was initially charged with Arpana's murder, and 2.5 years after his acquittal, Emanuel filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Redmond, King County, lead prosecutor Jeff Baird, and lead detective Brian Coates. The law office representing Emanuel in his civil suit is Galanda Broadman P. LLC. His lawsuit alleges that investigators had tunnel vision for him, that there was racial bias because he was the only Black person, and that he was treated differently than other white suspects. He also claims mistreatment while he was in prison. Emanuel is seeking compensation and damages for emotional distress, loss of liberty, mistreatment, and poor conditions while being incarcerated. He is also asking for his attorney fees and costs to be covered, and for any other relief that the court deems appropriate. It is now 2026, 5 years later, and this civil suit is still going through litigation. It was supposed to go to trial earlier this year, but it was put on hold pending various appeals. In filings from March 2026, Emanuel dropped his lawsuit against Detective Brian Coates and prosecutor Jeff Baird with prejudice. Since the charges were dropped with prejudice, that means Emanuel can never file this lawsuit against them again. He is still pursuing the case against King County and the city of Redmond, though. Now again, Emanuel was acquitted by a jury of his own peers. He spent nearly 9 years in jail while this case was tried twice. Granted, about 3.5 of those years he would have been in prison anyway for failing to register as a sex offender for a second time. But still, that is 5.5 years behind bars for a crime you were acquitted of. Cameron Johnson was never charged with anything in connection to this crime. And you are innocent until proven guilty. And the state of Washington never proved that for either of these men. But after reviewing everything in this case, I truly feel that the totality of the evidence proves that Emanuel was involved in Arpana's murder. And I think that Cameron was too. And the jury never got to see all of that evidence. They were never presented the theory that Emanuel and Cameron could have committed the crime together, and that's completely on the prosecution for choosing to only file charges against Emanuel. But I don't think that because of that, Emanuel is entitled to a payday. If anyone should be compensated, it should be the Jinagas. That is it for me, guys. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me. Guaranteed, y'all listen to me talk a lot more than most people in my everyday life do, so I appreciate you spending your valuable time listening to me ramble for hours on end. I'm excited for the next case that I will be covering, and I promise I will get it out to y'all quicker than 4 months. Probably only be 1 month till the next video, maybe quicker. But anyways, I hope y'all have a great rest of your night, and bye for now.